Hi Flashes, today we are going to be looking at the Slope-Intercept review worksheet for your quiz tomorrow. So the first thing here says write an equation of the line in slope-intercept form and then graph the equation of the line. So remember guys, when we're talking about slope-intercept form, we are talking about y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is your y-intercept. So for the first one here, it says that the slope is 4 and then the y-intercept is -8. So since they told you the slope is 4, you are going to plug that into the equation for m, since m represents your slope. So this will be y equals 4x plus your y-intercept, which is -8. So you can say plus -8, or that is the same thing as -8. So then you want to graph it. So remember, you always want to start at the y-intercept. So our y-intercept is -8. So -8 is down here, and I'm going to put a point. And then we want you guys to perform slope 2 times here. So if our slope is 4, remember we can write slope as a fraction. So I'm going to put my slope over 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and perform slope. So remember, slope is rise over run. So the 4 means from this point I'm going to rise up 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the 1 in the denominator tells me to run 1. And remember, we always run to the right. So here's my next point, and then I'm going to do it one more time. So 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. And this is my line that creates the equation y equals 4x minus 8. Okay, so let's do the same thing for the second one. So this says that the slope is 1 and the y-intercept is 6. So again, if my slope is 1, I'm going to plug that into my slope here for m. So it's going to be y equals 1x plus b. So plus b is my y-intercept of 6. So our equation is y equals 1x plus 6. Now remember, when we go to graph this, you always start at the y-intercept. So now I'm going to start at 6. And then I'm going to perform slope 2 times. So if my slope is 1, remember, I need to write it as a fraction, so I'm going to put it over 1. So this means I'm going to rise 1 and I'm going to fall or run 1. So from this point, we're going to go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. And this is my line. Okay, next one, so now we are going to be looking at graphs, and we are going to write an equation in slope-intercept form, and remember to identify what the slope is and what the y-intercept is. So again, I'm just going to rewrite the slope-intercept form equation up here at the top, which is y equals mx plus b. And then let's go ahead and start identifying the slope and the y-intercept. So slope, remember, slope is rise over run. To find slope of a line, you need 2 points on the graph or on the line that cross that intersection. So the first 2 that I see here are this point and this point. And remember, when you're finding that slope of the line, you're always starting with the point furthest to the left, and then you're trying to get from this point to this point. So I always say from point A to point B. So we are going to count the rise, and remember, if you can't rise, that means that you have to fall, and when you fall, that tells you that your line is negative. So let's see, how far do we fall? 1, 2. And then count how far do we run. So 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay, so if my rise was -2 and my run was 3, that means that we had a slope of -2 over 3. And then my y-intercept is where my line crosses at on the y-axis. So as you can see, the line crosses at the point 2 here. Okay, so now that we have all the information that we need, we can now set up our equation in the format of y equals mx plus b. So remember, m is your slope. We just found the slope to be -2/3, so I'm going to plug in -2/3 for m, and don't forget the x on it. And then it's going to be plus your y-intercept, so we said our y-intercept was 2. So my equation is y equals -2/3 x plus 2. All right, so let's do the same thing here with number 4. So again, to find slope, you're using rise over run, and you need 2 points on the line that cross at intersections. And in this case, they actually gave us the 2 points that they want us to use. And again, out of those 2 points, you're starting with the point furthest to the left, and you're trying to get from point A to point B, okay? So again, first thing you're doing is rising. However, here I can't rise because I'm getting further and further away from my point. So now I must fall, and when I fall, that tells me that my line is negative. So let's count to see how far do we fall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I fell 10, so that's -10. And I ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my slope then is -10/5, but we do want you guys to simplify. So -10/5 simplifies to -2. And then the y-intercept is where the line crosses out on the y-axis, and as you can see, it crosses right here at -10. So when I go to set up this equation in slope-intercept form, that is in the format of y equals mx plus b. So our equation is going to be y equals, our slope was -2, so it'll be -2x plus my y-intercept of -10. So you can put plus -10, or you can write -10. Okay, let's move on to the second page. So on the second page, we are going to write an equation of the line in slope-intercept form that uses the given information, show all necessary formulas, and all work. So the first one here, number 5, says that the slope is 1, and we have a point that is 9, -5 on the line. So whenever you are given slope and a point, you are using your y equals mx plus b formula to plug this information into this equation and then solve it for whatever variable is left, okay? So if they tell us that our slope is 1, I'm going to plug in 1 for m. Remember that for an order pair, it's always in the format of x comma y. So for my variable x, they're telling me that x is 9, so I'm going to plug in 9 for x. And then my y variable is represented by the number -5, so I'm going to plug in -5 for y. And then what I'm trying to solve here is for b, which is my y-intercept, okay? So remember, in y equals mx plus b, we can plug in any order pair in for x and y in order to find a missing variable. So in this case, we're actually finding our missing b variable, okay? So let's go ahead and solve this for b. So first thing I see here is I need to simplify my 1 times 9, which is 9. So I'm now going to be left with -5 equals 9 plus b. And then to get that b by itself, I need to get rid of the 9. So since the 9 is positive, technically that means that it's adding 9. So the opposite of adding 9 is subtracting 9. And I will get -5 minus 9 is -14 equals b. So we now have all the information that we need in order to set up our slope-intercept form equation, because they told us that we had a slope of 1, and then now we just figured out that our b is -14. So our slope-intercept form equation is y equals slope of 1, so this will be y equals 1x, plus my b, which is -14, so you can put plus -14 or -14. All right, looking at number 6. So now we're given 2 points on the line. So what we first need to find is slope. So remember, in order to find slope given 2 points, we are using the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, and remember, in our 2 order pairs, it's always x comma y with our order pairs, and then our first order pair we represent it by x1 y1, and then our second order pair we represent it by x2 y2. Okay, so now we're just going to plug in our numbers into our formula. So it's y2 minus y1, so y2 was 4, y1 was 6, so I'm going to take 4 minus 6. And then it's going to be x2 minus x1, so x2 was 0, x1 was negative 8, so it's going to be 0 minus negative 8. And then now I'm just going to simplify. So 4 minus 6 gives me negative 2. 0 minus a negative 8 is a positive 8. And then I can simplify this fraction by dividing by 2. So my slope is going to be negative 1/4. So this is my m. Okay, so the nice thing about this problem is this is the only work that we have to do, because for our y-intercept, remember the y-intercept is where it crosses at on the y-axis, so that's when x is equal to 0. And if you guys are looking at our points here, notice how this point has an x value of 0. So if I were to plot this on a coordinate plane, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is where that point is going to be at, and that's the point that crosses on the y-axis. So we don't actually need to do anything to find our slope or to find our y-intercept, because they're telling us right here that our y-intercept is 4. Okay, so this is our b value. So I have my slope, I have my y-intercept, so now let's go ahead and plug this into our equation. So our equation is going to be y equals negative 1/4 x plus 4. All right, moving on. So the entrance fee to the national park is $20. A campsite fee is $10 per night. The total cost y for a camping trip for x nights can be represented by the equation y equals 10x plus 20. Graph the equation and remember to label your x and y axis. Okay. All right, so notice how our 2 variables is the cost. So they represent cost as our y value. So I'm going to put my y variable over here on the side. And then for x amount of nights, so x axis is represented by number of nights. And then now we can go ahead and start graphing this. So remember, when you're looking at your slope-intercept equation, you want to start at the y-axis. So in this case, our y-axis, our y-intercept is 20. So I'm going to put a point at 20. And then I'm going to perform slope. So in this case, our slope is 10. So remember, we want to put this as a fraction, so we're going to put it over 1. So this means that we're going to start at the point 0, 20, and we're going to rise 10 and run 1. And notice how our y-axis is already going up by 10s. So when I go up 1, I'm actually going up 10, which is what I want. So I'm only going to go up 1 and over 1, up 1 over 1, up 10 over 1, up 10 over 1, and I can keep doing this, and this is the graph that I'll get here. Okay. Alright, so after we graph it, part B, interpret the slope. So remember, when you're interpreting the slope, you're looking at your slope, and you're going to say for every 1 and whatever the 1 is talking about, which in this case is the number of nights, you're going to say what happens. So for every night, how much is it going to cost? Well, for every night, it's going to cost $10. So interpreting the slope, for every 1 night, it will cost $10. So this is how I start all of my interpreting the slope sentences for every, and it's going to be for every one something. You just need to determine what independent variable is representing the x and what dependent variable is representing your y there, the 10. Okay. And then when you're interpreting the y-intercept, you're just telling me, what does this 20 represent? Well, this 20 was the starting cost of the park. Because it said right here, the entrance fee was $20. So we can put the entrance fee to the national park. Okay. All right, and then part D, use the graph to determine the total cost for 5 nights. So notice how I went ahead and I filled in the rest of my graph. And then I can just use my graph to figure out, okay, at 5 nights, it's going to cost them $70. And remember, another way that you can do it is you can plug in 5 here for x and then solve it for y. So 10 times 5 would give you 50. Plus 20 would give you 70. So that's another way to do it. Alrighty, moving on to number 8. The earnings for bookstore A are shown in the graph. The amount earned y for x hours at bookstore B is represented by the equation y equals 10x. Circle the true statement. Okay, so looking here at A, it says bookstore A earned more than bookstore B. So right now they're telling us that bookstore B has a slope of 10. So we need to figure out what's the slope over here for bookstore A. So again, I'm going to pick 2 points on the line. Let's say I pick those 2. And remember, when you guys are finding the slope, you need to be careful of what your y-axis and what your x-axis is counting up by, because notice how my y-axis is actually counting up by 8s. So when I'm finding the slope of rise over run, and I'm starting with my point furthest to the left, when I go up 1 over 1, I'm really going up 8 over 1. So this means that this equation has this line has an equation of y equals 8x. Okay, so based off of this situation, bookstore A has only earned $8 an hour, and bookstore B earned $10 an hour, so bookstore A did not earn more than bookstore B, so it's not A. Next one, bookstore A earned $16 an hour. Well, we just figured out from our slope that it was $8 an hour, so it's not B. Part C, bookstore B earned $8 an hour, and bookstore B is based on the equation up here, y equals 10x, where the 10 is represented by bookstore B, so that's not correct. So let's just make sure our last one is correct, and it says bookstore A earned less than bookstore B, and again, bookstore A only earned $8 an hour compared to 10, so we know that that's our true statement. All right, next one, number 9. So the directions are down here at the bottom. So write an equation in slope-intercept form for the table shown and show all work. So here is our table on the next page. And let's set up this equation. So again, when we're finding slope, there's a couple different ways that we can do, or we can find slope from this table. We are looking at our change in y's over our change in x's. So one way that we can do this is noticing how time is represented by x and distance is represented by our y value. So I'm just looking at these changes that happen. So when we went from 0 to 150, that went up 150, 150 to 300, that went up 150, 300 to 450, that also went up by 150. So notice how all of my y values went up by 150, so my change in y is a positive 150. Then we're going to do the same thing with our change in x's, and if you notice, going from 0 to 2 went up 2, 2 to 4 was up 2, and 4 to 6 was also up 2. So since I have this constant rate of change, my change in x is 2. So then when I simplify this, I figure out that I have a slope of 75. Okay. Another way to do it was to take your change in y over change in x and find the unit rate by taking 150 divided by 2, 300 divided by 4, and 450 divided by 6. Okay? So 75 is represented by my slope, so this is my m value. Then I just need to figure out what's my y-intercept. So remember, the y-intercept is where your line crosses out on the y-axis, which means that your x value is equal to 0. So notice how in the table they tell us that our x value is 0 right here. So my y-intercept is going to be whatever this number is over here, which also is 0. So when you go to set up your equation, which is y equals mx plus b, you're going to plug in your slope, which is 75, in for m. And then since your y-intercept is b, you don't have to put plus 0. You can if you want to, but it's not necessary in this situation. Oh, that should be x, not m, sorry. There we go. Alrighty, last one. Write the given equation in slope-intercept form, state the slope in the y-intercept, and then graph the equation on the line on the coordinate plane. So again, if you guys see an equation like this and they want it in slope-intercept form, it has to be in the format of y equals mx plus b, where y is what we're going to solve for in this situation. So if we're trying to get y by itself, I need to move everything else on the same side as y over to the other side. So in this case, since we're always going to add or subtract first, I am going to move this negative 2x, okay? So since it is negative, the opposite of a negative is a positive. So in other words, this is like subtracting 2x. So the opposite of subtracting 2x is to add 2x. Okay, so when I do that, my negative 2x plus 2x cancel. I'm left with 3y equals. And then since we cannot take negative 15 plus 2x because those are not common terms, those are not like terms, I am just going to rewrite that down here in the problem. So we're getting closer, but this still is not in slope-intercept form because I need it to be y equals. Right now it's 3 equals. So remember to get rid of this 3, since the 3 and the y are multiplying. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. And when you're dividing by this 3 on both sides, remember that this 3 goes with every single term on that side. Okay, so when I'm taking this, I'm going to get y equals negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5 plus 2x divided by 3. Since 2 divided by 3 is not going to give me a whole number, I am just going to leave it as a fraction. And now it's in slope-intercept form. So this equation is going to go down here. Y equals negative 5 plus 2/3 x. All right, so now let's state the slope and the y-intercept from our equation here. So remember, slope is always the number that is attached with our x, because in our formula, m is attached to the x, which is slope. So in this case, our slope is 2/3. And then our y-intercept is our plus b part, which in this case is negative 5. All right, so let's graph it. So again, you're always starting where the y-intercept is at, which in this case is negative 5. And then from that point, you are going to perform slope 2 times. So slope is rise over run. 2 is on top, which means that we are rising 2. 3 is on bottom, which means that we are running 3. And remember, you always run to the right. And then you're going to do this 2 times. So now from this point, I'm going to go up 2 over 3. And this is my line. Alright, so if you guys have any questions, please let your teacher know, but this is the slope-intercept review for your quiz tomorrow.